Hello and welcome to Crime Shoe Time, snapshots of crime history. The 9th of April 1984 was a usual Monday for Margaret Maggie Backhouse. She needed to collect veterinary supplies from Wootton Under Bridge, the next village from Widden Hill Farm, Horton, South Gloucestershire, the home she shared with her husband Graham. She climbed into the driver's seat of Graham's Volvo. He had lent her his car after he found the ignition in her Fiat was faulty. She turned the keys and began to reverse out of their stone-built garage. Moments later, a homemade bomb exploded. Miraculously, Maggie survived and was able to crawl from the car. Passing motorists came to her aid, and one ran into the farm to find Graham and to ask him to call 999. Shocked, he called an ambulance for his wife, telling them that she had been injured in an explosion. She was rushed to French Hay Hospital and underwent extensive surgery, with 2/3 of a pound of lead and metal fragments being removed from her legs, hips and buttocks. Thankfully, none of her injuries were life-threatening. A police guard was placed by Maggie's bedside. Police sealed off the farm and called in specialist dog teams and army bomb disposal experts from Tidmouth to search for further explosives. None were found, and the forensics team collected all the parts of the bomb for analysis. Detective Superintendent Tom Evans, the officer leading the inquiry, gave a press conference. The Backhouses had been the target of a weeks-long campaign of harassment. Hate mail, threatening phone calls, and a severed lamb's head was found outside the farm with the note, "You next," by it. That seemed to have culminated in the car bombing. The assumed target was Graham Backhouse. After all, it was his car. How would the bomber know that it would be Maggie that morning in the Volvo? A police guard was assigned for the farm, but a few days later Graham sent them away and a panic button was installed. 3 weeks after the bombing, that panic button would be activated. On Monday, the 30th of April, PC Richard Yedden arrived at the farm. Graham was found lying in the living room with wounds to his face and chest. A large cut on his face, from his ear to chin, would need 80 stitches, apparently inflicted by a Stanley knife. In the hallway was the body of Colin Beadle Taylor, a 63-year-old former army officer and fellow villager. He had an obvious shotgun wound to the chest, and in his hand a Stanley knife. Graham said that Colin had arrived to fix some furniture. Confused, he told him there was nothing to fix. However, once in the home, Colin started to attack Graham, accusing him of being behind the 1982 car crash that had killed Colin's son. He then confessed to Graham that he was the one behind the harassment and the car bomb. Retreating down the hallway, Colin slashed at him with the knife. Graham had no choice but to grab the shotgun and shoot when he refused to back off. But obviously that wasn't true, or we wouldn't be here together discussing this case. Graham Backhouse would be described in court as, quote, a failure in life. He never really wanted to take over the family farm, and it showed. He would have rather wrote murder mystery novels. And in April 1984, he was £70,000 in debt. It was this financial pressure that drove him to hatch a murder plot so unbelievable it took just 2 weeks for the police to unravel it and for Graham to be charged with the attempted murder of his wife Maggie and neighbour Colin. Up until March 1984, both Graham and Maggie had life insurance for £50,000 apiece. Weeks before the bomb, Maggie's insurance was doubled to £100,000, around the time the harassment campaign started. This alone gave the police pause for thought, but the forensics made the case. The trial opened in February 1985 at Bristol Crown Court. Home Office forensic experts were able to rebuild the bomb. It consisted of 2 sections of metal pipe threaded with a detonator. The explosives was the gunpowder of 12 shotgun shells, and it was packed with 4,000 lead pellets. It was aimed upwards through the driver's seat. Avon and Somerset detectives testified how they could link Graham to each component of the bomb. Examining pathologist Dr. William Kennard took to the stand testifying that Graham's knife could not have been caused by someone else, unless he stood still and allowed it to happen without resisting or protecting himself. The wounds were self-inflicted. This was corroborated by the blood splatter analysis. If the blood had been distributed during a struggle, it would have fallen in very distinctive exclamation mark shapes, but they were found to be round, suggesting that Graham had been standing still when the blood dripped. On Colin's hand that held the Stanley knife, there was his own blood, meaning when he was shot and he started to bleed, he probably instinctively put his hand to his wound, shocked by the unprovoked attack, and then the knife placed in his hand. The crime scene was found to be staged. Furniture was knocked over as if a struggle had occurred, but it had landed on blood splatter, and one chair had a blood smear on it. All the blood belonged to Graham. Most telling, there was no blood on the gun. When the Stanley knife was examined, it had CBT scratched into it. Colin was a handyman and advertised his services on a community notice board. He was known to take pride in his tools, and none of the other tools were marked in the same way. The prosecution presented that Graham had scratched CBT into the knife to reinforce the idea that this was definitely Colin's and that it was a premeditated attack. It backfired. But it would be Graham's own actions while he was in custody that would solidify the case against him. He offered another prisoner £12,000 to sneak a letter out of the prison to the Bristol Post, implicating Colin in the bombing. The police intercepted the letter and were able to match the handwriting to the letters that the couple had received during the harassment campaign. The prosecution summed up the case. Graham Backhouse had faked threatening letters and calls in order to set the scene for the murder of his wife. When she survived, he needed another suspect to take the fall instead of himself. He called Colin under the ruse of needing his handyman skills and shot him, staging the scene so the police would believe that Colin had harassed the couple, attempted to murder Maggie and then attack Graham. All Graham did was defend himself. He would walk away scot-free with £100,000 in his pocket. The jury of 8 men and 4 women retired for deliberations on Monday the 19th of February 1985. In 5 hours they returned a 10-2 majority guilty verdict, and he was given 2 life sentences. Mr. Justice Stuart Smith admonished Graham, quote, "You are a devious and wicked man. Not content with trying to kill a wife who, according to your own evidence, loved you and had done you no wrong, you then set about cold-bloodedly to plot and kill your neighbour who had done you no harm and you barely even knew." Maggie attended every minute of the trial, supported by other members of the family. As Graham was led away, he couldn't even look at her. In June 1994, Graham suffered a fatal heart attack while playing cricket for Grendon Underwood Prison near Aylesbury. He was 53 years old. Following his death, it was revealed that he was actually engaged. His fiancée was Rosemary Abador, an artist who had served 2 years in prison for stealing nearly £3 million from the National Hospital for Neurology Development Foundation by pretending to be a titled aristocrat. Sadly, less than a year later, in March 1995, aged just 48, Maggie would pass away in her sleep. The couple would leave behind 2 teenage children. I will leave you with the thoughts of Derek Robinson, a resident of Horton Village and reporter for the Western Daily Post. Quote, "One of the saddest aspects of the trial was the way it virtually put Colin in the dock. I know the defence was entitled to do this, but I felt enormous sympathy for the rest of the family, made to suffer accusations about someone they love who was dead and unable to answer. The headlines will fade and be forgotten. The suffering will not. Colin was survived by 3 adult children." Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and let me know what you think of this case in the comments below, and I look forward to welcoming you in the next one.